Sirens screamed through the quiet Phoenix night. She pressed her hands against his chest, whispering numbers, shaking, blood smeared across her sleeve. The billionaire stood frozen beside his car, watching his son's body go still, and the girl everyone ignored became the only one who moved. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Globe showing Europe, Africa, United States, Canada, UK, Australia, Jamaica. Phoenix in early spring carried a strange kind of heat, dry, dusty, and honest. The kind that never lied about what it was. Graham Hollister liked that. The man had built his fortune on things that looked clean on paper but messy underneath. Real estate, tech data, quiet acquisitions that never made headlines. He was the kind of billionaire who didn't smile unless cameras were on, the kind that shook hands without remembering names. But in the heart of his gated estate in Arcadia, behind walls laced with desert ivy, lived his only real reason for silence. His 13-year-old son, Jalen Hollister. Jalen was a bright boy trapped inside a body that didn't always cooperate. Born with cerebral palsy, he walked with a limp and spoke with the slow, careful tone of someone who knew he was being judged before he even finished a sentence. Graham loved him, but love wasn't the same as connection. Since his wife's death during childbirth, Graham's world had narrowed down to business deals and guilt. He gave Jalen everything money could buy: private tutors, therapy, a pool built just for hydro sessions, but nothing that made the boy feel normal. And maybe that's why, one quiet Thursday morning, Graham made a decision that no one in his circle could understand. He enrolled Jalen at Madison Ridge Middle School, a regular public school in South Phoenix. No private aides, no chauffeurs, just a normal student among normal kids. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was desperation disguised as hope. Jalen's first day felt like landing on another planet. The hallways smelled like old floor wax and cafeteria pizza. The walls were covered with paper posters about kindness and anti-bullying that nobody read. He kept his head down, hands tucked close to his chest, backpack heavy with books he didn't need. Kids stared. Some whispered. Some didn't care. But one person noticed something different. Not pity, not curiosity. Just awareness. Her name was Nova Lattimore. 15. Tall for her age. Wore her hair in tight curls and her hoodie like armor. She had the kind of presence that made silence uncomfortable. Nova had grown up in South Phoenix, near 19th Avenue and Southern, in a small duplex her mom rented month to month. Her mother, Tamira, drove a city bus and worked night shifts at Banner Health. Her father had been gone since she was 8. Nova was used to standing up for herself. But that day, something about the quiet boy limping across the courtyard pulled her attention. Not because of how he walked, but because of how others watched him, like prey. She saw the sneers before he did. The cruel snickers. The way two boys, both wearing the same brand of sneakers they bragged about online, nudged each other and whispered. She felt that old burn in her chest, the one she got when teachers looked away. By the time she reached the vending machines, she'd made up her mind. If they messed with him, she'd step in. She always did. It wasn't heroism. It was instinct. Jalen didn't notice her. He never saw the kind of protection that comes before danger. For the next week, Nova kept her distance, watching. He struggled to carry his lunch tray, fumbled with zippers, dropped pencils that no one picked up. She'd catch glimpses of him in the hallways, always alone, always apologizing for existing. Then came Friday. The sun was brutal, bouncing off the concrete courtyard, and the air smelled like dust and French fries. Jalen was sitting under the lone mesquite tree, sketching in a notebook, when the same boys from before showed up again. Nova wasn't far. She could hear every word. By the time she turned the corner, the laughter had changed. It wasn't playful anymore. It was sharp, and Jalen was trembling, trying to grab his crumpled notebook from the ground. Nova didn't hesitate. She stepped between them, planted her feet, and stared them down with the kind of glare that made even teachers uncomfortable. The courtyard went still. Someone started recording. And just like that, Phoenix witnessed the beginning of something no one could explain yet. That afternoon, Jalen went home silent. His father noticed the scrape on his elbow but said nothing. Nova went home with her hoodie torn and her phone blowing up with messages from kids she didn't even talk to. The video had already spread through the school group chat. Black girl protects billionaire kid. No one knew who she was protecting or from what, but everyone had an opinion. By nightfall, it had 12,000 views. And somewhere in a mansion miles away, Graham Hollister saw the clip on his tablet. His son, surrounded, shaking, and a stranger standing between him and the world. For the first time in years, something inside him cracked open. If you've ever felt invisible while trying to do the right thing, you understand what Nova felt that day. Maybe that's why stories like this matter, because decency doesn't trend for long, but it still saves lives. If you believe that, stay. This story's not done with you yet. By Monday morning, the entire 8th grade at Madison Ridge had seen the video. Some replayed it to laugh. Others replayed it to feel something. And a few, mostly the quiet ones, just stared, wondering why courage never looked like what movies promised. Nova didn't care about any of them. She walked into school with her head high, even as whispers followed her down the hallway like shadows. She'd done what felt right. That should have been enough. But in schools like Madison Ridge, doing the right thing didn't make you brave, it made you a target. Jalen didn't show up for 2 days. Teachers said he was sick. Nova knew better. He wasn't sick, he was scared. The kind of scared that comes when the world reminds you that kindness comes with a cost. The comments online were worse. Clout chasing. Staged for attention. She only helped him because cameras were rolling. Strangers dissected her face, her tone, her race, her hoodie, her silence. But buried under the noise, one detail got missed, the look on Jalen's face when she stepped in front of him. It wasn't fear. It was disbelief. Like he'd never seen anyone choose him before. At the Hollister estate in Arcadia, Graham watched that same clip over and over. He sat in his marble kitchen long after midnight, tablet glowing in the dark. His PR advisor had sent it as a potential optics issue. That phrase made him sick. He saw his son's limp, the bully's laughter, and that girl, standing tall, unshaken, fierce. He zoomed in, studying her expression. She didn't look like someone performing. She looked like someone protecting something sacred. For the first time, Graham realized he didn't know his own son outside of therapy reports and medical charts. Jalen wasn't fragile, he was unseen. And that girl, Nova, had seen him. Meanwhile, back at school, things escalated. A few students tried to be friendly to Nova, hoping her sudden attention would rub off. Others wanted to make her pay. By Wednesday, her locker had been vandalized. Slurs written in permanent marker. The principal promised to handle it, but nothing happened. She shrugged it off. That's what strong people did, right? Pretend the weight didn't hurt. But that night, lying on her small bed in their South Phoenix duplex, Nova stared at the ceiling and wondered why doing the right thing always felt like losing. Her mom noticed the silence. Tamira had worked 2 jobs long enough to recognize exhaustion that wasn't physical. She didn't ask questions. She just left a cup of hot cocoa by the nightstand before heading to her night shift. That same night, Jalen finally convinced his father to let him return to school. He couldn't explain why, but he needed to. When Graham dropped him off, security insisted on escorting him inside. Graham agreed, but as he watched his son walk through the gates, he couldn't ignore the whisper in his gut. He was sending him into a world he didn't understand. When Jalen entered the cafeteria, everything stopped. Conversations halted mid-laugh. All eyes turned. Nova looked up from her table and met his gaze. For a moment, neither moved. Then she nodded once, subtle, like a silent promise. You're okay now. But peace never lasts long in middle schools. By lunch, the same boys who'd started the trouble were back. New phones. New jokes. And this time, they didn't want to fight. They wanted humiliation. They called him names, mocked his voice, his limp, his mother he couldn't remember. Nova heard it from across the room. The tray hit the floor before anyone saw her coming. She didn't shout. She didn't threaten. She just walked up, picked up Jalen's fallen book, and stared at the boys until their laughter broke into nervous silence. Back off, one muttered, but his voice cracked. The cafeteria went still. Someone started filming again. Always filming. But this time, when Nova turned, her face was calm. Controlled. As if she'd made peace with the fact that she'd never fit in, and maybe that was her power. Teachers arrived too late as usual. The video hit social media within hours. By evening, hashtags formed. Some praised her. Others tore her apart. But one thing was certain. Phoenix now knew the names Nova Lattimore and Jalen Hollister. At the Hollister mansion, the chaos hit differently. Graham's PR team urged silence. Let it fade, they said. But Graham couldn't. He'd seen something in her eyes that reminded him of his late wife, a kind of unfiltered humanity he'd long buried under business. He replayed the video again, not for scandal, but for clarity. And that's when he heard it, barely audible at the end of the clip, before the phone dropped. Nova's voice, low, steady, and raw. It wasn't anger. It wasn't fear. It was something else. Something that made him stand up from his chair. He replayed the video until the battery died, the house silent except for that one line, her voice cutting through static. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a plea. It was a promise. And for the first time, Graham whispered her name out loud. Nova. Phoenix nights carried a strange stillness, the kind that settled heavy after a long day of noise. The kind that made truth louder than it should be. For days, Graham Hollister couldn't sleep. He kept hearing her voice through the grainy video, that one sentence that cut deeper than anything his board of investors ever said. Some people don't need saving, they just need someone to stand there and not run. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't designed for sympathy. It was a truth carved out of experience. That single line shattered everything he thought he understood about courage. The next morning, he canceled every meeting, silenced his phone, and drove his Tesla through streets he'd never bothered to learn. The other Phoenix, the one hidden behind billboards and forgotten bus stops. The one where Nova Lattimore lived. He didn't know what he'd say. He just knew he couldn't stay in his glass mansion pretending he hadn't seen real life bleed through a screen. Nova's neighborhood was nothing like Arcadia. The air felt heavier, full of noise and resilience. Kids played basketball barefoot in cracked driveways. Music drifted from porches. The houses were small, some paint-chipped, but every window had curtains, and somehow, that felt more like home than his entire estate. When he finally found the address, 1648 West Verde Lane, he sat in the car longer than he should have. The house was modest, faded blue, patchy lawn, an American flag hanging crooked from the porch. A city bus stopped at the corner. He saw a woman step out in uniform, tired but graceful. Tamira Lattimore. He watched as Nova met her mother halfway, hugging her like she hadn't seen her in weeks even though it had only been hours. It was a kind of love he'd forgotten existed. He didn't get out of the car. Not yet. He couldn't just walk up and announce himself. He was a billionaire in a $3,000 suit parked in a neighborhood where rent was more than most could manage. So he waited. But Nova noticed him first. She wasn't afraid, just curious. You couldn't grow up in South Phoenix without recognizing when something didn't fit. She approached the car slowly, one eyebrow raised, hands shoved into her hoodie pocket. Graham rolled the window down halfway. "Mr. Hollister," she said before he could speak. "I figured you'd show up eventually." He was speechless. How did she even know his name? Nova smirked, not rudely, just knowingly. "People talk," she said, glancing at his luxury car. "You're kind of hard to miss." He tried to find words, but all that came out was, "You helped my son." Nova shrugged. He didn't deserve what they did. Nobody does. It was the simplest sentence, but it hit him harder than any investor pitch or news headline ever had. He wanted to offer her money. That was his default solution, throw dollars at discomfort. But something in her posture warned him that would be an insult. She wasn't a charity story. She was a person who did something brave and didn't expect a reward. So instead, he asked the one question he hadn't asked anyone in years. "How do I make this right?" Nova studied him for a long moment, like she was deciding whether he was worth the truth. "You can't fix what happened," she said finally. "But you could try listening. Most people never do." That answer stayed with him long after he drove away. Over the next few days, Graham did something that confused everyone around him. He started showing up at Madison Ridge Middle School. Not as a donor, not as a figurehead, just as a parent. He sat quietly in the back of PTA meetings, talked to teachers, asked questions about the things nobody ever asked about: broken ramps, faulty elevators, outdated therapy equipment. He saw the cracks, the kind his money could actually fill, if he chose to. Meanwhile, Nova and Jalen slowly built a quiet friendship. She'd sit with him during lunch sometimes, help him open his juice boxes, and he'd draw little sketches for her: faces, stars, a skyline that looked suspiciously like Phoenix. They didn't talk much, but they didn't need to. Two people who understood what it meant to be stared at didn't need explanations. Jalen laughed more. Nova smiled more. For a while, that was enough. But not everyone was happy about it. The same kids who once mocked them now felt threatened by them. Popularity in middle school is fragile. One viral moment could turn into months of cruelty. One afternoon, Nova found a note in her locker that made her blood run cold. "You think you're a hero? You'll wish you weren't." She didn't show it to anyone, not even her mom. She'd learned early that strength meant silence. That night, she went home to find a package on the doorstep. No label. No note. Inside was a box of brand new sketchbooks and pencils. Expensive ones, the kind sold in art stores she'd never been able to afford. She knew immediately who sent them. She didn't tell anyone. She just opened one and began drawing. A portrait of Jalen, smiling, unafraid. The next morning, she brought it to school and slipped it into his locker. No words, just art. When Jalen showed his father that drawing later that evening, Graham didn't say anything for a long time. He just stared at the lines, the texture, the care. It wasn't just a drawing. It was proof that someone had seen his son as more than a condition. And for the first time, he felt ashamed, not of Jalen, but of himself. It's strange how strangers can hold up a mirror to everything we try to ignore. Maybe that's why this story found you today. Because deep down, you remember what it feels like to be seen when you didn't think you mattered. Don't walk away from that feeling. Stay with this one. You'll understand why. In the following days, Graham did something no one expected. He invited Nova and her mother to dinner, not at his mansion, but at a small diner near Roosevelt Row. No cameras. No reporters. Just people trying to figure out what kindness looked like when the world wasn't watching. They talked for hours. About schools, neighborhoods, grief, and how people assume wealth means wisdom. By the time they left, Graham realized something that had been missing from his life since his wife's death: genuine connection. He drove home that night feeling lighter, unaware that the calm wouldn't last. Because the world had found their story again, and this time it wasn't kind. For about a week, peace pretended to stay. Graham Hollister went back to work with a different kind of focus, one that had less to do with money and more to do with meaning. He started meeting quietly with school administrators, helping fix accessibility issues under the radar. He told no one. He didn't want headlines. He wanted change that didn't need applause. Nova and Jalen settled into an easy rhythm. They ate lunch under the same mesquite tree every afternoon, swapping sketches and stories. She'd talk about her mom's long hours, her dream of studying art in college. Jalen talked about stars, how he could name every constellation over Phoenix, even when the city lights tried to erase them. For once, both of them felt safe. But good stories never stay private for long. It started when a local blogger posted a photo of Graham at Madison Ridge. Billionaire visits poor school after viral video. The headline read. It took less than an hour for bigger outlets to pick it up. Then the national ones came. Suddenly, the story that had quieted down exploded again, louder, harsher, and far more dangerous. Cable shows argued about it. Commentators debated motives. Some praised Graham for building bridges. Others accused him of exploiting a poor black girl to cleanse his image. Nova's face appeared on thumbnails across the internet. Her social media accounts, barely used before, were flooded with comments. PR stunt. Gold digger. She's getting paid to smile. Her phone buzzed constantly until she turned it off. But that didn't stop the whispers at school. By Friday, even teachers looked at her differently. The same ones who'd ignored the bullying now seemed to treat her like a liability, something messy they didn't want to be part of. At home, Tamira watched her daughter shrink into herself. Nova stopped drawing. Stopped talking. The spark that had once made her untouchable dimmed under the weight of strangers' opinions. Tamira tried to comfort her, but how do you protect your child from a world that feeds on misunderstanding? Meanwhile, in Arcadia, Graham faced his own storm. His company's board demanded explanations. Investors were nervous. "You're jeopardizing public trust," one of them said. Another threatened to resign. Graham didn't care. For the first time in decades, business felt irrelevant compared to the pain he saw unfolding outside his gated walls. Jalen noticed it too. His dad stopped smiling, stopped sleeping, pacing the marble floors late at night while news anchors tore apart everything he'd done. Then came the breaking point. A new video surfaced, an edited clip showing Graham's earlier visit to Nova's neighborhood, but twisted out of context. The captions claimed he was scouting for a marketing campaign. The footage made it look staged. The story caught fire. Within 24 hours, his company's PR lines were flooded. Nova's home was vandalized, red paint sprayed across the porch with the word "faker." Tamira called the police, but all they could do was file a report. The neighborhood knew who'd done it, but no one talked. Fear ran deep in places like that. Graham drove to their house that night, but Nova refused to come outside. She was done. Done with cameras. Done with pity. Done being a headline. The next morning, Jalen didn't go to school. His therapist called Graham later, voice tight with worry. "He's shutting down emotionally," she said. "He blames himself." And he did. In the silence of his room, Jalen scrolled through the comments and saw his name dragged through anger he didn't understand. He believed every cruel word. He thought he'd ruined Nova's life. By Sunday night, Graham found him sitting by the pool, sketchbook open, water still. "I didn't mean to make it worse," Jalen whispered. "Maybe if I disappeared, she'd be okay." That single sentence shattered him. Graham realized then that this wasn't a PR nightmare. It was something far more human. A reflection of everything broken about how the world consumed pain for entertainment. He knew what he had to do. He didn't tell his advisors. He didn't ask permission. He just acted. On Monday, he sold every share of his company's media holdings. The news called it erratic. His investors called it reckless. But Graham didn't care. He was done feeding the same machine that had turned his son's pain and Nova's courage into digital noise. Meanwhile, Nova hadn't been to school in 3 days. Her mother feared she might never go back. But that night, as rain fell over Phoenix, a rare December storm that made the desert smell alive again, Nova put on her hoodie, grabbed something from her desk drawer, and stepped out the door. It was the drawing. The first one she'd made of Jalen smiling under the mesquite tree. She wrapped it carefully in plastic and walked through the rain toward Arcadia. Every step felt like a confrontation with the world's cruelty, but also its hope. When she finally reached the gates of the Hollister mansion, the security cameras turned toward her. She didn't flinch. She rang the bell once and waited. Inside, Graham opened the door himself. When he opened the door, Nova stood there, drenched, shivering, clutching something wrapped in plastic. Her eyes were red, but her voice didn't tremble. What she said next would change the way the entire city saw his son, forever. The rain came down harder, washing over the driveway like the desert had finally decided to cry. Graham stood frozen at the door, unsure if he was looking at a ghost, a reckoning, or a second chance. Nova's hoodie clung to her shoulders, her fingers shaking around a small wrapped package. She looked nothing like the girl from the viral video. She looked human, tired, but certain. Without speaking, she held it out. "It's his," she said softly. "I found it in my locker this morning." Inside the plastic, water-damaged but intact, was Jalen's sketchbook. Graham took it carefully, as if it might crumble in his hands. "He must have left it at school," he whispered, though he knew she hadn't come all this way for a lost drawing. Nova nodded toward the book. "There's a letter inside," she said. "You should read it." He opened it right there in the doorway, the storm lighting up the Arizona sky like a confession. The pages were filled with sketches, Nova's face, their schoolyard tree, the stars he loved so much, but near the back, written in shaky pencil, was a note. "Dear Nova, You said people don't need saving, just someone who won't run. I don't know if I'll ever be strong like that. But when you stood up for me, I felt like maybe I could be. Thank you for not running. Jalen. The handwriting wobbled across the page, every letter a quiet fight against the tremor in his hands. Graham didn't realize he was crying until the paper blurred. Nova stepped back, unsure what to do with the silence between them. He didn't do anything wrong, she said. You didn't either. The world just likes noise more than truth. Those words struck him like thunder. Because that was it, the whole reason for everything that had gone wrong. The world wasn't cruel because people hated each other. It was cruel because it was louder than kindness. Graham took a breath. He's inside, he said quietly. Do you want to give it to him yourself? Nova hesitated. Then she nodded. Inside, the mansion felt colder than it looked. Expensive but empty. Jalen sat on the couch wrapped in a blanket, eyes distant, television muted. When he saw her, he froze. Nova didn't say a word. She just held up the sketchbook. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Jalen smiled, small, uncertain, but real. And in that smile, Graham saw something he hadn't seen in his son since his wife died: life trying again. Tamira arrived shortly after, worried sick, but when she saw her daughter sitting beside Jalen, laughing softly at something he drew, her shoulders relaxed. For the first time, there was peace between two families who never should have crossed paths, but did, because decency found its way through chaos. The storm outside passed by morning. And that's when Graham made his choice. Not for press, not for forgiveness, just for truth. He called the school board, bought the old, failing Madison Ridge building outright. But instead of naming it after himself or his company, he restored it quietly, with a team of community workers from South Phoenix. He hired Nova's mother as the transportation director, improved disability access, and turned the empty field behind the gym into a community art and learning space. When the work was done, he renamed it Lattimore Ridge Middle School. He didn't make speeches. There were no cameras, no ribbon cutting, no press releases. Just a plaque by the entrance that read, "For those who stood when standing cost something." The city noticed, of course. News stations tried to get quotes. He ignored them all. Because it wasn't about reputation anymore. It was about repair. In the months that followed, Nova started teaching an after-school art class for kids who'd been bullied or isolated. Jalen attended every session, sketching by her side. They didn't talk about the past. They didn't need to. Graham visited often, but never as the billionaire. Just as a father who finally understood what his money could and couldn't fix. He'd sit on the bench under the mesquite tree and watch them draw, sometimes smiling, sometimes crying quietly when no one was looking. He'd learned that redemption didn't come with applause, it came with consistency. Nova, on the other hand, stopped running from attention. She learned to use it. When people online tried to turn her story into another headline, she redirected it toward something better. She started a small social account called Still Standing, sharing stories of real kids defending real people without the filters or fake smiles. It grew slowly. No viral spikes. Just steady hearts showing up to listen. And maybe that was the point. Because in the end, neither fame nor fortune fixed anything. It was the simple act of showing up, again and again, that healed what the internet broke. Months later, on a quiet evening, Nova visited the Hollister house one last time before leaving for a summer art program at Arizona State. She found Graham on the back patio, sketchbook in hand. He handed it to her. "He wanted you to have this," he said. "Said it belongs to the person who gave it meaning." Nova smiled. "Tell him I'll keep it safe." Graham nodded. "He already knows." As she walked away, the desert sunset poured gold over the sky, painting everything in that fleeting color between ending and beginning. Somewhere behind her, Jalen's laughter drifted through the open window, soft, light, and unafraid. And for the first time in a long time, Graham Hollister didn't feel like a man trying to prove anything. He just felt grateful that kindness, for once, had the final word. In a city that forgot what compassion looked like, one act of courage made it impossible to ignore again. Maybe that's the real wealth no one talks about, the kind that doesn't fade when the world stops watching.